Hello and welcome back. I'm Demis Hellen and this is episode number 3 where we're going to be taking a look at the percussion, including the kick and the bass. So here we are with the percussion. You can see again relatively simple. There's a lot of loops going on, but I'm going to explain how I've chopped them up to sort of give it a bit of a more unique twist and bring some more groove into the track. We're also going to look at the kick and bass at the bottom. Kick is part of the percussion, but the bass and the kick get processed together, so we'll go through that at the end of this episode. But first, let's have a listen to what we've got. So we're going to start with a shaker and I'm going to show you how we can put this into a different groove or add swing to the sound. As you can hear at the moment, everything fits nicely and it has this sort of like nice, jolly, bouncy feel to it. But the shaker didn't start like that. So let's jump into the shaker. If you double click on your audio sample, you'll get the sample editor. If you click on hit points down the left-hand side, you're going to get this slicing tool and it's going to auto slice based on the transients. So with this being quite transient in terms of there's no sort of like swelling into the sounds, it's picking up the loudest parts quite nicely. You can use the threshold to sort of like finesse that if you want to, but that sets it up just nicely. And then you can jump into the audio warp and then this is where the magic happens. You can see I've got swing slider here and it's already set to 47. So if I bring this down, you can see it's pushed all those notes back to where they were, or those samples. And with a swing resolution of 16th notes, which this is what this is, we can then slide this up and give it swing. And we can go really far if we want to, but around that 47, 48 mark was nice. So you can hear it's given that nice little bit of bounce and it adds more character into the sound. And then when you start teaming that up with the other loops that I've got here, just have to slide that back up. It adds a nice vibe to it and it sounds more humanized, more natural, and it just flows better. So let's turn our attention to the perk hit and the groove track here. Now you're going to notice I've got a few slices of sound in there and you're going to see I've got a few slices missing on the other one. So let's just jump in and have a look. If we bring this track out a little bit, there is a particular sound here that I didn't want. And if we look, it's there. Let's just drag this out the way a second. It's like sort of like a poppy, bubbly sound. Didn't want it in there. It seemed to cheapen the song a little bit and it was a nightmare with the compression and stuff I was trying to do for it at the time. So removing that, just give it a little bit more of a consistent sound, but it left gaps in there. So if we jump over to this part, you can see I've got another section here chopped out and another section here. Now there was double pops coming from the end of this loop. So, or the end of that phrase of the loop. So a bit further in the loop, we get another section like this one here, but slightly different, which sort of rolls it back into the start of the sample. So this was more of a 4-bar loop instead of a 1 or 2-bar loop. So I've made it into a 2-bar loop by taking the bits that I liked out of there to avoid those sort of like squashy, squishy sounds in there. And the result is much nicer than the original, but it's seamless at the same time. And it gives it a nice loop round. Now, a little tip for you here, if you use the adapt to zoom feature here and we get our scissors, you can see when we zoom out, it's going to pick based on positions of beats, bars. But if we go right in, it's going to adapt it into 16ths or 30 seconds, whichever you've got currently selected here in your quantize. You can see now I can go in at a 16th level and chop things out at 16ths. Whereas if we just leave that on bar, you can see it's just snapping to the bar. It's not giving us any options. Same with beat. It's going to snap to beats, but again, not many options. Use quantize is a great one. So now it's going to do it in 16ths, but you're having to make an extra click. So I leave this on adapt to zoom so you can really get in there nitty and gritty without having to click anything apart from zoom on the keyboard. And that gives you more flexibility chopping those sounds out. And that's how I made those chops. So if we move on to the next one, let's not spend too much time looking at the chops. But again, there's a little bit of a loop here. You can see the end of that one, a little bit of a volume roll off, but let's just put that back in. Sort of a horrible woody tone to it. So I removed it and did this, which is exactly the same sound, but you can see I've used the volume feature that I showed you in the last episode and brought the gain down of this one. So you can see I've brought it down 5 dB. A little bit too loud for the whole loop in my opinion, but it fits nicely there. And you can see I've done it for each one so I can keep that loop seamless. So it comes in handy just chopping these up and just making sure you can make adjustments, and then you don't have to try and do everything with a compressor or an EQ. So then from there, we've got the generic stuff like the crash, we've got the bottle loop that we've already covered, clap, and then we've got some guitar chugs underneath. Now you might not have noticed these, but they add to a little bit of the texture again at the bottom and just adds that little extra to the track. So this started off as I think it was a 1 beat sample. It was just 2 chugs in 1 beat, and I've sort of layered them up and then exported them into loops, and they sound like this. And I'm just using it as percussion. I'm really not using it as anything else, but you can hear once we start to add everything in, notice the missing. But you don't know what you're hearing, and they're the sort of textures that I like to work with. Things that just fill a certain void where something's missing and you feel, should I turn a certain element up to sort of like compensate, or shall I add something else in that kind of complements? And the guitar chugs seem to work better in the percussion section for this track. Now in terms of processing, everything's quite normal, it's rolling off and stuff like that, but let's have a look at the percussion group. So I've got the tube, and this is absolutely cracking for adding extra harmonics and just really sort of bringing everything together. So let's have a listen to everything off for these. Let's just solo our percussion. So you can hear that brightens up the sound, but at the same time, it just seems to breathe life into it. Just like I did with the reverb and the atmoses, it just breathes a little bit of life, lifts it up, and just seems to give it that airy feel about it, which is what I was going for in this track. So a little bit too bright in my opinion, so that obviously goes through some EQ. And then we have frequency, controlling lows and highs. We've got a bit of a shelf going on number 7 there, and you can see that we've got that -2 dB. So it might not look much, but we are just taming it by 2 dB, which is quite drastic. And then a brick wall limiter to just control any sort of rogue transients that come through, just to capture them in. And you can see that's just capturing up to about 1.5 dB. It's just to stop anything going too rogue in the track and makes mixing easier later on. So let's finish up the episode by looking at the kick and bass here. Now this is sort of like the warmth and drive line that sort of gels everything else together. It brings the groove into its own by having that kick as a pace. So the kick drum here is just one of my kick drums that I've made, and it's going through a few bits of processing here to remove certain things to sort of fit it into the track. So let's listen to how that sounded before processing. So it all starts with the kick on frequency. We've got a little bit of control over the boxiness area in the sort of 100 to 200 hertz area. And then also the 500 hertz area was sort of kicking a bit through too much the mix. So that was tamed down at this level, and a little bit of a boost for warmth. But where the real magic happens with my kicks in Cubase is I use Studio EQ for adding some nice sort of wide band boosts or cuts, depending on what's needed. And then GEQ is a little bit more fine tuned and works really well. So you can see I've got some series of boosts here, and it doesn't look like there's really much happening according to the UI. But if you look at what's going on here on that, we've got a +1 dB, +1, 1.4 and a 3.1. So there's a lot happening, but taking this away really sort of collapses the kick and just sucks the life out of it. So adding this in really does boost it along with GEQ 10. So let's have a listen to this one first, and then I'll turn this one on. So again, it's bringing life out of it. It's adding little bits of warmth in the areas that I want it to. So giving it some weight, giving it some presence, and then just giving it a little bit of fizzle on the top. So you can see I'm working with 2 EQs, so I'm not overdriving one in a particular area. So I'm just kind of doing some nice wide boosts just to get the overall sort of sound where I want it to be, just leveling it out. And then the GEQ 10's job is to remove more precisely some of the boxy frequencies, or the frequencies that are really sort of cutting through the mix that I don't want there. It's part of the kick process, sometimes not removed. In this case, they weren't. And you can see I've got a 250 and a 1K drop here. And that just overall makes the kick sound bassier and just gives it more warmth. So let's have a listen again and just scrutinize exactly how it sounds. So for those that can't really hear what's happening there, I'm going to boost these up so you can hear exactly the frequency, and then I'll bring it back down and then you can hear exactly what's going on. So I'm not changing this one. I am going to load in another instance of GEQ 10, and I'm going to boost the same frequencies, 250 and 1K, so you can hear exactly. So hopefully you can hear what that's doing by boosting those frequencies. It's very subtle in what I've done to remove them, but it sort of then refocuses the kick to where it's meant to be, which is the sort of low end warmth and a bit of the click on the top. And it just helps it sit in the mix a lot better as well. But probably the biggest thing that's happening is the effects modulator. So using this as a volume shaper, but in the opposite way, to control the length of the kick and how much of that tail sort of booms into where the bass line is. So you can hear it shortening the kick and effectively sort of like reshaping the kick using that. And it just keeps it more conformed and stops it sort of like just going off where it wants, especially when we come to the mix and mastering of this. And then finally, we have the effects modulator. I'm just going to show you that in a second. I'm just going to turn on mono to stereo. Really simple stuff. This is just putting the kick into mono. And then the volume shaper here is allowing me to reshape the kick that might have got a bit longer or was too longer in the first place. And it just gives us the option to control it and fit it into the mix a lot nicer, so it's not getting in the way of the bass line. And we're doing that based on 16th notes. You can see here we've got 16th notes, and that is 2 16th notes long. It just goes over a little bit, and that just stops it conflicting with the bass that's off beat, which is this sort of Retrologue Grease bass. And that's just cutting the kick off before the bass really takes full effect and takes full power. And then the frequency at the bottom is just for fading in and out the kick using a high pass. So the bass, let's have a quick look at this before we finish up. Again, a Retrologue 2-patch. a multi-lane and a single lane. So we've got a single sort of like solid centered part of the bass, and then we've got a nice wide full sound, which is a very typical Reese style bass. Using the low pass 12 with a low cutoff on the tube there, so we're getting a little bit of distortion coming through, boosting those harmonics. And what we're doing then is just passing it through a mod effects, adding some chorus, which then adds a little bit of width to the sound as well. So let's have a listen to that. So very simple stuff, but I just wanted something that complemented an overall like blanket of warmth over the track. Now, really, we're getting a bit of extra harmonics out of the tube, but what's really happening is the squasher plugin here. So typically you'd use squasher to really overhype sounds, make them really loud, make it really fill up, bring out all the reverbs and the delays, everything that modulates the sound, and just bring it to life and just add some craziness to it. But with the squasher in this track, I'm being quite subdued, so I'm showing you really how you can use it on a lower level as well. So I'm really just boosting the lows and the mids, more so the lows, and I'm just using the compression to sort of like independently process them, just to get a little bit more sort of like value and warmth and presence out of this sound. And it's also bringing out and adding and breathing life into it as well. And also, again, like all the other processes I've been doing, that's breathing a little bit of life into the bass as well, just by boosting those areas and taming the highs. Then all in all, when we add all the percussion in, it really does give the track its direction. It's quite boring and tame till you add that percussion in, because you're adding the groove in there, and we're also getting the bottle in there that's providing some rhythm and sort of a unique texture. It's something that you don't hear in many tracks, and then that bass just sits lovely and warm on the bottom. So there we are, that brings us to the end of the episode. Hopefully you've got some new ideas to add into your own mixes using some of the things that I've shown you in today's video. I thank you for watching. I've been Demis Hellen, and I'll see you in the last episode where we cover the mixing. See you there.